After everything June Osborne has been through over the course of The Handmaid's Tale, it seems almost impossible to imagine that one conversation could change everything. But that's exactly what happened in the season finale of The Testaments. Without even realizing it, Daisy may have just given June the one thing she has been searching for all these years. And if that's true, Season 2 could take the story somewhere fans have been waiting nearly a decade to see. Before getting into that huge discussion, it's worth quickly looking back at what Secateurs actually accomplished. The finale was packed with tension as Daisy and Agnes desperately tried to save Becca from the eyes. Their determination had a surprising effect on several people inside Gilead. Even powerful figures who normally operate within the system found themselves making unexpected choices because of the girls' courage and loyalty to one another. But underneath all the chaos and danger, the episode quietly set up something much bigger. In many ways, Secateurs wasn't really about Becca. It wasn't even about the growing cracks inside Gilead. It was about June. More specifically, it was about the possibility that June's greatest mission might finally entering a completely new chapter. One of the most interesting things about Daisy throughout the Testaments has been how much she resembles June. She has that same stubborn determination. She acts from the heart, and sometimes she throws herself into danger without fully thinking through the consequences. Those qualities make her incredibly brave, but they also make her unpredictable. That became especially clear when June herself appeared in the finale. Unlike her previous appearance, June wasn't there simply to help from a distance. This time, she had a very personal objective. She wanted Daisy out of Gilead. From June's perspective, the decision made perfect sense. She knows better than anyone what Gilead is capable of. She has spent years watching people she loves suffer under the regime. She has lost friends, allies, and countless innocent people. So naturally, when she had the chance to remove Daisy from danger, she wanted to take it. But Daisy refused. And honestly, that moment felt incredibly familiar. In many ways, Daisy sounded just like June did in The Handmaid's Tale. She couldn't walk away. She couldn't abandon the girl she had come to know. She couldn't stand by while people she cared about remained trapped inside Gilead. As Daisy explained why she needed to go back, she began talking about Agnes and the other girls she had met. And suddenly, June realized something shocking. One of those girls wasn't just another victim of Gilead. She was Hannah. Or rather, Agnes. For years, June has been chasing shadows. Throughout The Handmaid's Tale, she rarely had any real information about Hannah. Most of the time, she was forced to fight Gilead itself because bringing down the system seemed like the only way she could ever hope to save her daughter. Ironically, some of June's biggest victories only made that dream seem more impossible. After the collapse of the Boston sector, Hannah and the Mackenzie family were relocated to Washington, D.C. By the end of The Handmaid's Tale, Hannah was further away than ever, while June was preparing herself for what looked like a very long war. Even after the Testaments picked up 4 years later, the situation hadn't changed much. June was still coordinating Mayday operations from Canada, while Agnes remained inside Gilead. Although both stories were moving forward, there was still an enormous emotional distance between them. That is why Daisy's revelation changes so much. For the first time in years, June isn't fighting blindly anymore. She knows Hannah is alive. More importantly, she knows someone she trusts has formed a genuine relationship with her daughter. Suddenly, Hannah isn't just a memory or a dream. She is a real person living somewhere inside Gilead, and there is now an actual connection between them. And that may explain why June struggled so much with allowing Daisy to return. Of course, Hannah matters more than anything to June, but that doesn't mean she wants to sacrifice another person in the process. June has lived with enough guilt and pain already. She knows the cost of this fight. Sending Daisy back means accepting enormous risks, not only because Daisy could die, but because June herself would live with that decision. At the same time, Daisy represents something almost impossible. She represents hope. And for the first time in a very long time, hope no longer feels completely unrealistic. What's fascinating about all of this is that the television adaptation has moved incredibly far away from Margaret Atwood's novel. In fact, the further the show goes, the more freedom it seems to gain. Readers of the Testaments know that June wasn't really a major presence in the book. In fact, she was never explicitly named. Instead, much of the story revolved around baby Nicole, who had become a symbol within Gilead. Even 15 years after escaping, the regime still considered baby Nicole a threat and remained obsessed with bringing her back. One of the biggest twists in the novel revealed that Daisy herself was baby Nicole, although she didn't know it. But the television series simply can't follow that storyline. The timeline no longer works. By the end of the Handmaid's Tale series, Nicole was still a small child. Meanwhile, Daisy and Agnes appear to be roughly the same age. That immediately tells us that the show is telling a very different story, and that might be for the best. Unlike the books, the television universe spent years building June Osborne into one of its most important characters. Elizabeth Moss became the emotional center of the entire franchise. Removing her from the sequel would have felt strange after audiences spent so many seasons following her journey. Instead, The Testament has done something clever. Rather than pushing June aside, the show has made her an active part of the story. And after Secateurs, her role may become even bigger. Because, let's be honest, you can't tease a connection between June and Hannah after all these years and then ignore it. That emotional payoff has been building since the very first season of The Handmaid's Tale. Every sacrifice, every act of rebellion, everything has always come back to Hannah. But perhaps the most interesting part isn't whether June and Hannah will reunite, it's what happens if they actually do. Because the little girl June remembers no longer exists. Hannah grew up inside Gilead. Agnes grew up inside Gilead. Those are two very different identities. Years of separation have changed both mother and daughter. Even if they finally stand face to face, that doesn't mean everything magically becomes normal. Love may still exist between them, but they are almost strangers. And that creates some fascinating questions. Would Agnes even want to leave? Would she recognize June as her mother? Can years of indoctrination really be undone? And perhaps most heartbreaking of all, has June spent all these years fighting for a daughter who no longer remembers the life they once shared? That emotional conflict could end up becoming one of the strongest parts of Season 2. Another character whose development shouldn't be ignored is Aunt Lydia. Throughout much of both series, Lydia has been one of the most complicated figures in this universe. She helped build the system, she enforced its cruelty, but beneath that loyalty, there have always been signs of internal conflict. Secateurs showed those cracks once again. The actions forced her to confront something she has been struggling with for years. Loyalty to Gilead and compassion for the girls are becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. And longtime readers know just how important that struggle eventually becomes. Which makes her storyline almost as interesting as June's, because sometimes the people who help build terrible systems are also the ones who help bring them down. That's one of the reasons Season 2 feels so exciting. Not because it guarantees a reunion, not because it promises a happy ending, but because for the first time, the future feels unpredictable. Book readers no longer know exactly where the story is heading. Viewers no longer know which twists are coming. And that uncertainty might actually be the show's greatest strength. Still, one question continues to hang over everything. Even if June finally reaches Hannah after all these years, who will she find waiting on the other side? Will she find the daughter she has spent nearly a decade trying to save? Or will she find Agnes, a young woman shaped by the very system June has spent her entire life trying to destroy? Because perhaps that's the question The Testament Season 2 is really asking. Not whether mother and daughter will reunite, but whether two people separated by years of trauma, loss, and Gilead itself can truly find their way back to each other. And to be fair, that might end up being even more emotional than the reunion itself.